Now, throughout human history, we've had a lot of bad ideas. However, from time to time, a really, really bad idea takes root and unfortunately spreads. Now, these bad ideas could spread throughout centuries, or just within a few years, overtaking the academic landscape. Ideas have a tendency to either revolutionize thought and lead to new innovative and constructive strides in the development of the human species, or it can stunt, destabilize, and bring about a new wave of destruction, such as a wave of authoritarian thinking or simply deconstructing societal cohesion. We have seen these things happen many, many times. As they say, history repeats, albeit in different variations. Yes, ideas take root, are built upon, either for the good of humanity or for the ill of humanity. Now, there are ways to predict societal trends, but regardless, I still find it difficult to predict which way the masses are heading. The propaganda does not help. However, sometimes all it takes is a little nudge. Always keep that in mind. It doesn't really pertain to this topic, but just a reminder. There is always someone with incentive to nudge society in one direction or another. Anyway, let's abruptly end that tangent before we get too far off track. I say all of that because the root of the topic tonight is Malthusian Theory. We have seen this mindset find its way into economics all the way to sociology, and it is really the main theme for various political movements today. So to get a better understanding of this, we have to go back to 1798, and the main focal point of this theory revolves around population growth. And yes, as I said, it's a theme to everything we see happen today. And I think overpopulation is fueling the abortion hype, trying to normalize late-term procedures. I think it's at the root of gender theory, and the push to make it mainstream. And honestly, I think it's related to the recent assisted suicide programs being unveiled in Canada and the European Union. They want less people. It is the core of their entire political platform. Anyway, and I quote, Thomas Robert Malthus, an economist, explained this theory in 1798 in his essay called The Principles of Population. Well, basically, this theory can be simplified as the following. The human population grows in an exponential format. It increases according to birth rate, and it's concerning that the food supply increases at a much slower rate. If the population keeps on increasing, there will be a limit and shortage of food. The shortage of food also indicates the increasing population. This increasing growth, if not checked, can put a strain on the economy, the environment, the government, and the overall infrastructure of various social institutions. End of quote. And, basically they're just saying controlling the growth of the population is important to sustain the population. Positive checks restore the balance between increased growth rate of population and the food supply. Now, I'm not here to tell you that this theory is wrong. As far as I can tell, there is some merit to the claims. It seems rather basic. A mathematical equation can summarize it. However, it's not so black and white. There are certainly other factors to consider, such as technological advancement, etc. In my estimation, there is not a clear-cut determination that we can stand behind and claim that society is going to collapse due to population growth. At any rate, this concept has blossomed into a full-on attack on humanity itself. And this Malthusian theory was the foundation for the Limits to Growth report in 1972. Alright. So Klaus Schwab was speaking at a young global leaders gathering in early September, and he said, and I quote, "So I developed this concept and I became so fascinated that I decided to create the foundation and bring stakeholders together. So the idea of Davos was born. Since the beginning, we assembled in Davos not just business leaders or government leaders, but probably the first big plea of people to take care of the environment was the Club of Rome exactly 50 years ago. And we gave the Club of Rome a platform to promote the ideas of the limits to growth." End of quote. Now, another investigation by Unlimited Hangout, Matthew Arrett, discusses the origins of the Club of Rome landmark 1972 report, The Limits to Growth. In that, he says, and I quote, "Sir Alexander King, in the computer model made famous in the 1972 Limits to Growth, imposed a new schism between humanity's desire to develop versus nature's desire to rest in mathematical equilibrium. Yes, it is this neo-Malthusian computer model that's being used to justify the culling of the unfit and the overpopulated useless eaters, and was subsequently incorporated into the third official World Economic Forum meeting at Davos, where Aurelio Pesci was introduced by Klaus Schwab and showcased the Limits to Growth magic to thousands and thousands of supportive attendees. Now, this particular meeting was sponsored by Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, a man who had already distinguished himself among upper-level managers of the empire by founding the infamous Bilderberg meetings in 1954. And later, he also founded the World Wildlife Fund for Nature in 1961. And of course, he founded that alongside channel favorite Julian Huxley and Prince Philip Mountbatten, both eugenicists. In addition to incorporating Club of Rome's population models into cybernetics-based planning, this summit also featured the official unveiling of the Davos Manifesto, a document which formalized the concept of stakeholder capitalism and the Fourth Industrial Revolution into the governing manifesto of this quote-unquote Junior Bilderberger annual summit. Now, Sir Alexander King was also responsible for a follow-up report released in 1991 entitled The First Global Revolution. Now, this controversial report includes a section called, and I quote, "The common enemy of humanity is man," which contains this often quoted section, and I quote, "In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. In their totality and in their interactions, these phenomena do constitute a common threat which demands the solidarity of all people. However, by designating them as the enemy, we fall into a trap. We fall into the trap about which we have already warned, namely, mistaking symptoms for causes. All of these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy, then, is humanity itself." So yes, you see that back in 1991, they were talking about how they need to change our attitude and our behavior, which is the reason for all the recent social engineering concepts. Some readers have interpreted this statement to mean that the Club of Rome was acknowledging that they would use the idea of pollution, global warming, water shortages, and famine to unite humanity behind the idea that humanity itself is the problem. And yes, that's exactly what they just said. Anyway, that's a common theme among all these modern political leaders. We have talked about this quite a bit with various examples. I mean, shit, damn near every political leader and or environmentalist has at one point or another claimed that we need to reduce the population to survive. It's kind of their thing.
A sense of relief, actually, in your frankness. You brought up some issues that others are reluctant to bring up.
Always. All the religious groups are against me because I'm talking about population. They want more souls. I want less on the planet.
However, let's move on to the section by checking out an article by Matthew Arrett at Unlimited Hangout, The Revenge of the Malthusians and the Science of Limits. What are the roots of the technocratic and transhumanist policies currently being pushed onto society? Well, in this essay, Matthew Arrett traces 2 centuries of British imperial grand strategists who adapted Thomas Malthus' system of scientific governance of useless eaters in opposition to the deeper creative impulses of the human species. It's a great article, and I hope you read the entire thing. There is a lot of detail. Anyway, and I quote, "Well, the entire system of eugenics advocated by Galton and people like Julian Huxley, well, it was just a repackaging of the underlying assumptions of the theories of population that were pushed by Thomas Malthus. Yes, Malthus promoted the mathematical thesis that population levels will always tend towards geometric growth, while our food supply, our resources, will tend to arithmetic growth, resulting in relatively forecastable crisis points. Yes, Malthus and his disciples, known as Malthusians, believed that social engineers should use these crisis points to scientifically manage the quote-unquote human herd. And again, Thomas Malthus believed that nature bestowed upon the ruling class certain tools that would allow them to accomplish this important task. Namely, he was talking about war, famine, and disease. Thomas Malthus coldly stated the following in his 1799 essay, and I quote, "We should facilitate, instead of foolishly and vainly endeavoring to impede, the operations of nature in producing this mortality. And if we dread the too frequent visitation of the horrid form of famine, we should sedulously encourage the other forms of destruction, which we compel nature to use. In our towns we should make the streets narrow, crowd more people into houses, and court the return of the plague." He actually said we should court the return of the plague. Now, if we take this cold logic to the extreme, the Reverend Malthus extended his logic to the practical elimination of unfit children whose value is comparatively low to society. And I quote, "I should propose a regulation to be made, declaring that no child born from any marriage taking place after the expiration of a year from the date of the law, and no illegitimate child born 2 years from the same date, should ever be entitled to parish assistance. The infant is, comparatively speaking, of little value to society, as others will immediately supply its place." End of quote. My God, man. That's just crazy. However, moving on. Britain's implementation of Malthus's quote-unquote science of population management was vicious. In the UK, the Poor Laws of 1838 ensured that no state assistance beyond workhouses would be provided for masses of impoverished subjects of the empire. Between 1845 and 1851, the repeal of the Corn Laws and Irish potato famine resulted in 1 million Irish dying of famine in a land with plentiful harvests. At the time, free trade agreements demanded export quotas be maintained, even at gunpoint, and despite mass starvation. In 1877 alone, over 10 million Indians died of British-directed famines as Malthus's system was applied in full force and throughout the British Empire. And the crazy part is, this theory is still pushing global politics today. Yes, today's world is faced with two possible future systems. On the one hand, there is a multipolar approach in defense of sovereign nation-states premised on long-term thinking, scientific optimism, and win-win cooperation. And that stands as one possible outcome. On the other, though, there is a unipolar paradigm of world government, depopulation, and zero-sum thinking. Gaining insight into these two opposing paradigms is more important now than ever before. And one important place to start is the genesis of the ideologies that motivate the Great Reset architects who are pushing society into a fourth industrial revolution, a quote-unquote revolution, where it is believed that automation and artificial intelligence will render most of humanity obsolete. We are told that this post-reset age will also see a merging of humanity with machine, a future scenario that is being pushed by figures like Elon Musk and Google's Ray Kurzweil, in order to quote-unquote stay relevant in the next phase of our evolution. Davos man Yuval Harari has echoed these sentiments, arguing that the levers of evolution will be now moved from the randomness of nature into the new gods running Google, Facebook, and the World Economic Forum. In a 2018 World Economic Forum sermon, Harari acted as the neo-Darwinian prophet of a new transhumanist age, saying, and I quote, "We are probably among the last generations of Homo sapiens. Within a century or two, Earth will be dominated by entities that are more different from us than we are different from Neanderthals or from chimpanzees. Because in the coming generations, we will learn how to engineer bodies and brains and minds. These will be the main products of the 21st century economy." Yes, it's crazy. This Borg-like deterministic faith in the human-machine synthesis that pervades the thinking of all modern transhumanists is both cultish, creepy, and just plain wrong. However, without a proper evaluation of the historic roots of these ideas, which threaten to push global civilization into a dystopian nightmare, well, it is therefore impossible to understand anything fundamental about the past 250 years of human experience, let alone see where this fatal flaw lies within the Great Reset transhumanist operating system. That system, of course, is simply a repackaged system of eugenics, under a new name that was developed in the aftermath of World War II. Leading transhumanist godfather and president of the British Eugenics Society, Sir Julian Huxley, enunciated this post-World War II objective by explicitly stating in 1946, and I quote, "Even though it is quite true that any radical eugenic policy will be for many years politically and psychologically impossible, it will be important for UNESCO to see that eugenic problem is examined with the greatest care, and that the public mind is informed of the issues at stake, so that much that is now unthinkable may at least become thinkable." End of quote. Okay, now there are a few fundamental things that should be understood about the pseudo-science of eugenics, otherwise known as, and I quote, "the science of cleansing the human gene pool of undesirable pollution." End of quote. Well, oh jeez man, that quote is crazy. Anyway, this emerged at the end of the 19th century, imagining a future age where the science of eugenics would replace religion. The school's founder, Sir Francis Galton, cousin of Charles Darwin, mused in 1905, and I quote, "It is easy to let the imagination run wild on the supposition of a wholehearted acceptance of eugenics as a national religion." End of quote. Now to me, it is infinitely interesting to find out how all of these guys are connected, because they all are. Every single concept being implemented right now has been conceived and built upon for centuries. A lot of it can be traced back to individuals such as Thomas Malthus, Thomas Huxley, Julian Huxley, Bertrand Russell, just to name a few. And speaking of Bertrand Russell, one of his proteges, Norbert Wiener, gave rise to cybernetics and the future transhumanist movement. Yes, in 1913, as Bertrand Russell's third and final volume of the Principia Mathematica was being printed, a young mathematics protege arrived at Cambridge from the United States on scholarship. His name was Norbert Wiener, and he soon found himself among a small group of boys who were closely mentored by Bertrand Russell and David Hilbert. Throughout his entire life, Weiner was possessed by the obsession to express Russell's logical, closed system in practical ways. Not only were Bertrand Russell's concepts of equilibrium of all things applied to concepts related to population control. However, that's not all, but the closed system concept was also being utilized as a way to introduce the merging of man and machine. So basically, all of Bertrand Russell's proteges seemed to believe that a human mind was a mixture of bestial impulses guided by a closed system machine logic, and nothing more. In a computer, the whole is but a sum of parts, and it must be such in all information systems, including human brains, ecosystems, and the universe as a whole. Therefore, quote-unquote metaphysical principles like soul, purpose, God, justice, and free will have no place in the minds of these human calculators. By the end of World War II, Weiner's work on feedback loops in aeronautics and radar led to the mathematician to devise a new language for managing complex human systems, which he soon discovered had applications in business, military affairs, and entire nations. The term he gave this new tool of control was called quote-unquote cybernetics. Describing his invention, Weiner stated, "Cybernetics, which I derived from the Greek word kubernetes, or steersman, the same Greek word from which we will eventually derive our word governor." Now okay, we're going to jump ahead a little bit. Cybernetic conferences evolved throughout the 1960s and 1970s, finding themselves increasingly integrated with international organizations like the UN, World Health Organization, and NATO. As this integration occurred, the new technocrats became ever more influential in setting the standards of the New World operating systems. Meanwhile, national governments found themselves increasingly cleansed of nationalist moral leaders like John F. Kennedy, Charles de Gaulle, Enrico Mattei, and John Diefenbacher. This resulted in deeper integration of both systems analysis and cybernetics into the governing framework of a new transnational power structure. Now, after Julian Huxley coined the term transhumanism in 1957, the cult of artificial intelligence, guided by a belief in the inevitable merger of man and machine, well, it increasingly grew, with such major events as the man-machine symbiosis thesis in 1960. But that's not all. It was also the application of these systems into the Defense Department programs like War Games Command Systems, SAGE, Semi-Automatic Ground Environments, and of course the Unmanned Jet Plane Defense Networks. Now, DARPA's Augmented Cognition Computer Soldier Dyads were yet another expression of this perverse idea, with hundreds of millions of dollars spent on the creation of enhanced cyborg soldiers. Yes, over the years, followers of this new cult soon found themselves operating as helmsmen in the new global ship of Earth, giving rise to a new global elite class of technocrats and oligarchs who are loyal only to their caste and ideology. They strive to shape their minds ever more closely to the model of idea computing machines capable of logic. However, they do not seek love or creativity. The more that these cultish technocrats like Yuval Harari, Ray Kurzweil, Bill Gates, or Klaus Schwab could think like cold computers, while getting the masses of the earth to do the same, well, it means that their thesis that computers must obviously replace human thought, well, it makes it so that idea can flourish. And that, in itself, is a tragedy. Once again, this is HelioWave. If you like the content, like, comment, and subscribe. Share the video if you want to. If you're in a position to, consider subscribing on Locals or Subscribestar. As always, make sure you disobey those true fascistas and the technocrats. But of course, I do hope you have a good night.